They came out and took our place, and my troop moved into Jonas's troop's location, and we slept in their beds. We packed up their things, walked through their tents with what felt like their lingering ghosts. I mean, it was the eeriest thing, man. Half-drank cups of coffee sitting on a desk. Derek Benson's tie shorts on the floor where it looks like he'd probably just changed out to his op kit. I saw on Matt Mason's desk a letter from his wife, Jessica, printed on a sonogram of their unborn baby and a note from her to him.
Let's move on to Extortion.
Yeah.
Biggest loss in SEAL team history still to this day.
Yeah. Very strange that prior to that, Red Wings was, and somehow I was directly involved with both. Yeah, that was a tough one, man. It was, what some people don't realize, I think, is that it was a troop. It was the largest loss of life, but it was a third of our entire command. I mean, that's a massive chunk of personality to just be gone like that in an instant. I was up in one of our fobs at the time, and we got the word. We were all hanging out, and we got the word, hey, something happened. One of the birds went down, and that's not that uncommon, but usually it's one of those, like, there was a malfunction. They crash landed. There's a couple broken bones maybe, but, all right, let's not overreact. These things happen. I think we become numb to that, just repetitive. These birds were just very reliable, and the pilots are exceptional, so we're going to be fine. That was the initial feeling I had. It was like, all right, let's see what happened. So I remember going in the jock and standing there, and we hadn't heard anything on the radio. And I was waiting to hear Jonas's voice come over the radio. Jonas Kelsaw, a good friend of mine, and he didn't come on the radio. Minute goes by. I'm watching the ISR footage, and you've seen it. People have seen it from the movies, but we're looking at this black heat spot. And normally, you can see the fuselage, you can see the outline of the helo sitting there. And so they're just looking at this black heat spot. And I was like, hey, man, can you zoom out? Like, what are you doing so zoomed in on this one heat spot? Like, God, there's a fire somewhere in the crash site, but like zoom out and show me the fuselage. Like, let's figure out what we're looking at here. And then the guy just looked up at me and said, that's the fuselage. That's the helo. And it was nothing but a heat spot. And it is in that moment I knew, okay, we lost the entire bird. And then I'm thinking, okay. So then I said, hey, will you print the manifest for the bird? Normally we would split up into different helos. Normally, there's a lot of reasons for that. But I said, print out the manifest. I want to understand which half of the troop it was. And then they printed it out and handed it to me, and I'm going down the list. And I said, hey, no, this is the troop roster. I need the manifest. You made a mistake. And the guy said, no, sir, that's the manifest. That was who was on the bird. And in that moment, I knew, oh my God, it's everybody. It's everybody. And so I ran quickly. Everyone else was making decisions. I wasn't in the decision-making capability here. Other people were solving these problems. We were just observing on standby. And so I ran to the phone, and I called my wife, and I said, hey, I need you to hear my voice. I can't tell you what happened, but I need you to hear my voice. And I could hear the quiver in hers, and she said, how bad is it? And I said, it's worse than Danny. And I said, I need you to watch the news, and the minute this thing breaks, you'll know it, and I need you to call my mom and tell her I'm okay. She said, okay. And then we began to figure out what to do next and how to process that, which I don't even know if we ever will. I mean, there's no real way to wrap your head around that kind of a loss. But you try, and you have the team. And we're all in solidarity as the team to suffer through this together. And so we did our best to do that. Here's what I'd offer. Concepts that I couldn't wrap my head around until this. 31 Americans and 7 Afghans, 31 including Bart the dog. FaceTiming with my wife as we're trying to figure out what to do. No one knew how to process this. The command didn't know what to do. There's no plan for this kind of thing. There was even talk of, do we bring these guys home? What do we do here? This is unprecedented. Are they even in an emotionally healthy enough state to stay in the fight? We always talk about staying in the fight. We're never out of the fight. Is that even possible with the gravity of this situation? And we're all wrestling with that. Of course, none of us wanted to go home. We knew we had to stay for for our future, for our sanity. We had to stay. We had to see it to the end. We had to fulfill our duty. I'm on a FaceTime call or whatever Skype it was at the time with my wife. And I'll never forget, I'm trying to articulate that need, understanding maybe a glimpse of the pain she's enduring. And she just looked at me and said, you stay and you do what you need to do. You finish the task at hand, and then you come home to me. And I'll be forever grateful for that, because then she went to every single funeral and memorial service while we stayed forward to continue the fight. She endured that. At one point, my daughter, who was really, really young at the time, we try to shield our kids from these horrors. Everyone does, but at some point, they know something's up. And when our babysitter became a live-in nanny, because my wife's at another funeral in another black dress with mascara running again, my daughter asked her, Mommy, what's going on? These aren't just meetings. I think she was 8 at the time, maybe. And my wife said, well, sweetheart, you know how Daddy and his friends go on helicopters as part of their job. Well, one of those helicopters had a crash, and so Daddy's friends got hurt. And her first question was Mr. Jonas on board? Because Jonas had previously volunteered to come out and take my place on a deployment so I could come home for that daughter's surgery. So Jonas was very close to our family. And my wife had to say, yes, sweetie, he was. And she said, are they going to be okay? And my wife answered it like only a warfighter spouse can. She said, no, sweetheart, their boo-boos were so bad they had to go to heaven to get fixed. I can't imagine a more perfect way to frame it for an 8-year-old's mind. So Amy kept going to the funerals, and I stayed on deployment. And DJ and his boys came out to help. So there's the DJ small circle again. They came out and took our place, and my troop moved into Jonas's troop's location, and we slept in their beds. We packed up their things, walked through their tents with what felt like their lingering ghosts. I mean, it was the eeriest thing, man. Half-drank cups of coffee sitting on a desk. Derek Benson's tie shorts on the floor where it looks like he'd probably just changed out to his op kit. I saw on Matt Mason's desk a letter from his wife, Jessica, printed on a sonogram of their unborn baby, and a note from her to him. It was just these remnants of life that felt like they were still there, and it felt like they could walk in the door at any moment. But you knew they couldn't and they wouldn't. And trying to reconcile those things in your brain was almost an impossibility. It was. I mean, it was. And I think that was part of the beginnings of those emotions getting bottled and put away, which would later become rage. But we did the best we can. We did the ramp ceremony. 2 C-17s. That blew my mind. 2 C-17s. And we sent them home, and then we got back to work. And this comes back to everything I was talking about earlier about becoming a monster and choosing not to do monstrous things. This was one of the most difficult leadership challenges I've ever faced, because we wanted revenge. We wanted to get after it. There was such rage and anger about the loss, knowing that we all signed up for this. This is part of the deal. How do you lead that when you see it in yourself? I'd offer, brutally honest, there was bloodlust. We wanted to get after it. So we very much looked at ourselves and realized, hey, if we're not careful here, we will become the very monsters that we're here fighting. And if we become the monsters that we're here fighting, then what are we doing other than contributing to chaos? And if that's the case, then there's nothing virtuous about this anymore. And then that defeats the entire point behind everything we're supposed to be doing and everything we're supposed to stand for as Americans. And so we were very deliberate as a troop about bringing in people to help us process these things and say, hey, help us understand our anger and our rage. Help us understand how to harness that on the battlefield, how to keep that monster bridled and not do the wrong things, not give in to vengeance, instead look for retribution. And we did it. And all eyes were on us. And we did it. And it felt so good. it was incredibly difficult because you were bridling something that you almost didn't want to bridle. We wanted to let it off the leash. There was a very strong desire to do it, but we held ourselves in check. And we executed those ops with such precision and stayed within the ethical boundaries of warfare. I've never been more proud of dudes than I was of what we did following that catastrophic loss.
Man, that's heavy. That is heavy.
It was a rough season, man. And then that wasn't even the beginning. The harder part was coming home. It was so unhealthy. And it's hard to describe without being embarrassed because I look back at how hard my heart had become and cruel I'd become. I mentioned the things my wife endured. I mean, she's a fighter. She's a fighter. Running the clock, when we were in buds, going into Hell Week, she's giving me a kiss before going to Hell Week goodbye. And she said, if you quit, don't come home to me. I don't want a quitter for a husband. This is the woman that endured these things for our nation. And I come home to her, and I found myself having conversations with her and my mom and my dad and my family and my friends, and they'd ask questions. And I found myself getting angry at their questions and not even wanting to share with them because in my mind I thought, you haven't earned the right for me to be vulnerable enough to share my grief with you because you weren't downrange with me, because you didn't endure what I did, because you didn't move into their tents and sleep in their beds with their ghosts. So I will withhold that from you. Why? I don't know. A coping mechanism? Back to where those emotions go. Incredibly unhealthy. I mean, it was destroying me. Anger, I've heard it said, is like taking a poison pill and expecting it to hurt somebody else. It was destroying me from the inside and thereby destroying my relationships, my relationship with my wife, with my kids. I mean, I already mentioned I wasn't home much already. And now you add to that when I am home, I'm angry at her for asking questions. If anyone's earned the right to ask those questions and have those conversations, it was her. But I was isolating myself and ostracizing her in that process. And it took someone intervening. It took someone who saw something and had the courage to say it. And I'll never forget the moment I was home from the deployment and I'm wrestling with all these things. And he said, hey, man, you have a rage problem you need to deal with. And I was very good at not showing it. So good that Amy's father was in the room and he said, Brad's not an angry person. I think you've misread him. And he said, no, I didn't say angry. He said, this is so far past anger. Brad has a rage problem and it's wrath and it's going to tear you up and you need to figure out how to deal with it or it's going to ruin you.
Who is this?
It was a close family friend of ours. Yeah, he was a doctor, actually. He's a doctor. And he was, we were there for an appointment with my wife. And as he's doing this appointment, he was he's very in tune to emotions and he kind of looked over at me. He's like, hey, you mind if I take a look at you and ask a couple questions? I was like, whatever, bro. So he does. And he nailed it within 5 minutes. It was just, he just stripped the veneer right off me. And it was really shortly after that, I realized I was not doing everything as well as I'd convinced myself I was. And I was straying from who I wanted to be.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.